people in one by one instead of the tracking more. So let me go ahead and start the recording.
Recording in progress.
Welcome everybody for Connections and Conversation. Very lucky to have Carter Cartwright with us today. It's actually the second time in PI, so thank you so much for coming. I'm going to introduce him in a minute, but just if you haven't been with us before, we usually begin with around 45 minutes of presentation, and then we move to the conversation part. Sorry. I'm going to ask that for the conversation part, if you can use the raise hand function, it's in the bottom of your screen under React. That will allow you, your image to come to the first screen at the top where we can all see you. Also, if you can keep your camera on, that would be lovely. This way we can imagine we're all sitting together and engaging in the same room. During the presentation, if you have any comments or things you want to react to, you feel more than welcome to put it in the chat. Carter won't be able to follow it as he speaks, but maybe when everything's over, he will be able to. Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce Carter. And Carter J. Carter is in no particular order a farmer whose cows have recently learned a new way to escape, assistant professor of clinical psychology at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, a farmer. Oh, sorry. No. Sorry for that.
I inflicted this whole stupid gag of a bio on you, which is not nice of me to do, but it amused me.
It's lovely. It's just that because it was less change, my phone was making trouble. It's okay. The farmers' chickens seems to be on strike, which is particularly ironic because Dr. Carter is a labor leader in the Union of Massachusetts, public college professors, and librarians, a former lecturer, and an affiliate faculty member in the Psychoanalytic Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania, from which they recently resigned to protest, about which more recently. The author of a forthcoming book, Beyond to Lose, How Psychoanalysis Came to Fascism, as well as new Substack Psychoanalyst, which is one of several reasons that their new asparagus beds are overrun with jewelweed. They are at work on their next book, Field Theory, Agrarianism and Analysis, which will offer further reports on the cows, the chickens, the asparagus, should anyone be curious in the future. And another new thing is that today he's a faculty of P-Hole that launched, and I'm going to put that
that's in the chat. I was ahead of you. We got that.
Oh, you already did that.
In the chat.
Thank you. And some of us know Adrian and Nicole. They're faculty there too. Avi Sakatapoulou and Pellegrini. A lot of really interesting things that are coming up. So go ahead, Carter. The floor is yours.
Sure. I'm so delighted. Thank you very much for indulging me with that ridiculous bio that I wrote late last night after I had an old fashioned. I'm sorry. Thank you all for being here with me. And if you'll permit me, I have some stuff I wrote that will take us about 30-40 minutes. And then mostly I just want to chat with you. And for whatever reason, Zoom thinks I'm speaking Spanish. Which I don't know. My very faint Boston accent. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I canceled that. I think that might be because of me.
Go figure. Okay. So, you're all too aware, I'm sure, that we're in the midst of like terrible, frightening news all the time. That my computer isn't behaving. Why is that? Fascinating. Pardon me while I push buttons. This is quite the moment to have your document that you're going to be reading from not work when you have 50 people who are supposed to listen to what you're going to say. So it goes. Oh, damn. Here. Oh, am I about to be cooked for the first time on a Zoom thing? Am I about to have a big problem? Here we go. And you got to bear with me for 1 sec because I'm having an issue and I got to figure out what's going on. So I beg your indulgence. I'm going to take a big risk. I'm going to force quit all sorts of things. I'm going to hope that I can reopen the thing that I need to reopen. And if not, you're going to have a much lower quality experience here. With 1,000 apologies.
I got that, but take your time. That's fine. And in the meantime, if people want to chat, that's okay.
You should certainly chat while I fix this.
Or Lynn, if you wanna, if you know the thing that Carter was referring to and you want to share, you're welcome to.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm beating Lynn to it. I regret. Um, so let me. Okay. So it's bad now. We're in the bad timeline, and it feels bad. And it's therefore often easier, at least for some people, to turn away from active engagement with fascism and understanding how to address it. We all only have so much attention, and I'm grateful that you're devoting yours to this. And I'm going to try to do my part to earn it. So, to which end, at the end of this talk today, I will talk about why it is very important for you to be a slut. That will be our dessert. But until then, it's roughage, I'm sorry to say. So this isn't just a rough topic emotionally. It's a rough topic because there's simply too much to be said, which is why I wrote a long book about it. But it turns out that it's difficult to get a book about fascists and their misdeeds published when the fascists now have a near infinite supply of money and lawyers. And because I knew how difficult it would be to get the book published, while I was writing it, I gave a painfully lengthy talk about the research to Psychoanalysis for Social Responsibility. And so if you are in the market for 3 straight hours of me talking at like 1.5 speed about every minute aspect of the history of the fascist campaign within and against psychoanalysis over the last 5 years, you should check that out. We'll link that in the chat in a little while. But what I'm going to offer here is somewhat different. I want to give you a high-level overview of the role psychoanalysis has played in the events that led to the current fascist regime in the United States. We, psychoanalysis, were the butterfly that created this hurricane. We were the canary in the coal mine. You can pick your winged metaphor. I'll stop torturing it, except for one, maybe, which is to say Icarus flying too close to the authoritarian sun. You get the idea. But my research finds that there's a direct line from psychoanalysis to the systemic attacks on trans people and their allies, Palestinians and their allies, immigrants and their allies, academics generally, that we're witnessing today. In every way that matters, this shit started with us. And we therefore have a special obligation as psychoanalysts to understand our role in the flowering of fascism and to make radically different choices in order to fight it now and fend it off in the future. We need to become anti-fascists, not in theory, not après coup, but forcefully and right now. So in an exercise in surface to depth, I'm going to tell you a few things that have transpired at my former employer, the University of Pennsylvania, in the last year or so, on our way to understanding how these events came to pass, and the role psychoanalysis played in creating the political environment that made them possible. So in late 2023, Liz Magill, who was Penn's president at the time, was called into a congressional hearing notionally on the subject of anti-Semitism. You may remember this one. The hearing was orchestrated by Elise Stefanik, who's a Republican representative from New York State, with inspiration and probably assistance from outside activists. Magill withered under hostile questioning about anti-Semitism and Palestinian rights activism on Penn's campus, failing to navigate a wholly predictable sophist line of attack, despite being a distinguished attorney, supposedly. So she resigned as president shortly thereafter, in part due to pressure on the university's board from billionaire activists like Bill Ackman, who posted one down on X after Magill resigned. He's also right now one of the main spenders, along with Michael Bloomberg, trying to torpedo the mayoral campaign of Zohran Mamdani. So he seems lovely. Since Magill resigned, an atmosphere of extraordinary hostility and intimidation towards anyone talking about Palestinians and their plight has descended upon Penn. The university has sought to cooperate with congressional demands for documents that many fear will be used to persecute faculty members who address the Palestinian plight. And this concern has heightened in face of revelations that ICE, you may have seen this news, has relied on websites like Canary Mission, which exists to facilitate the harassment of pro-Palestinian academics. ISIS relied on them for intelligence to support them in kidnapping people like Rumesha Ozturk, the Tufts graduate student who was politically imprisoned for writing an op-ed in the student newspaper at Tufts. Students involved in encampment protests at Penn were suspended. They were barred from graduation. They had their houses raided by the Penn police, and this was common across the Ivy League and other universities. Faculty academic freedom at Penn was curtailed in various ways, including via the introduction of a new Title VI office, Title VI in the Civil Rights Act, which they call the Office of Religious and Ethnic Interests, OREI, which purports to, quote, address allegations of discrimination, including harassment based on a person's actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, or citizenship or residency in a country with a dominant religion or distinct religious identity. This is kind of striking because Title VI of the Civil Rights Act covers way more than those things. So the narrowing down of that is conspicuous. And many are concerned that this office is functioning as an instrument to discourage or punish criticisms of Israel, even in assigned readings, which is to say, even in assigned readings that the professor assigned them may not agree with the author, on the grounds that it might distress someone who feels a connection to the distinct religious identity of that country. Since Trump took office, Penn, which is his alma mater, you may recall, so an eminently biteable breast, Penn has been one of several elite universities that he sought to put in the stocks. The Trump administration withheld $175 million of federal funding to Penn via a Title IX complaint, rather, that asserted that it was discriminatory to allow trans women like the decorated swimmer Leah Thomas to compete in university athletics. 2 weeks ago, Penn capitulated to the Trump administration in order to recoup that $175 million. And to get it back, they had to ban trans women from university athletics, as well as issue personal apologies to people who lost to Leah Thomas. And since Trump, a reality star in a previous life, knows that long-running feuds are good for sustaining attention, one imagines this will not be the last time he threatens Penn, and we should wonder what his pretext will be next time. I think supposed anti-Semitism seems like an obvious choice. The firing of pro-Palestinian, by whoever's definition, faculty members, particularly tenured ones, that's the Sophie's choice I would create if I were a despot trying to break academia. So we shall see. In the midst of all of this, I was having a hell of a time. Until a few weeks ago, I was a lecturer at Penn. I taught a doctoral course on psychoanalysis in their social work school, and I was affiliated with the university-wide psychoanalytic studies program. My course on psychoanalysis was, as you might imagine, largely a course on Jewish intellectual history being taught, not for nothing, by a Jewish faculty member. Last year, among dozens of articles by and about leading Jewish intellectuals, many of which are explicitly about anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish fascism, and most of which were written in the midst of the Holocaust or its immediate aftermath. In the midst of all that, I assigned 2 brief sections of Lara and Stephen Shiha's Psychoanalysis Under Occupation, Practicing Resistance in Palestine, which you should read. This was evidently sufficient to lead a student to complain about me to the aforementioned Office of Religious and Ethnic Interests, seemingly just weeks after that office was formed. And what happened next was, to use a phrase that is becoming overused for a reason, Kafka-esque. I was called into a meeting with my department chair and another administrator in which this complaint was on an agenda that included other items squarely under the aegis of my academic freedom, like what kinds of dissertation research I assigned and things, or I supervise, stuff like that. I was forbidden explicitly from bringing a representative of the American Association of University Professors, Penn chapter, the organization on campus that's charged with advocating for my interests. Fortunately, I successfully insisted that the meeting be recorded, and you can find a transcribed version of that in the article I recently wrote about it on my Substack, for your delectation, linked in the chat. It is hilarious in many ways. In this meeting, I was told that OREI had not found me guilty of any infraction, but that they nonetheless counseled I should balance my syllabus. No one could offer a definition of balance beyond suggesting that if you talk about Palestinians at all, you have to talk about anti-Semitism, so it's balanced. That's what my associate chair said. nor could anyone make a coherent argument that I actually was or was not balanced, in part because no one, including perhaps OREI, had actually reviewed the contents of my syllabus. And even if they had, they would have lacked the academic expertise to offer a meaningful judgment on its merits and would not actually have been entitled to tell me what to teach or not teach in any case, because that's what academic freedom has meant in the university for something like 800 years. A few months after this meeting, my contract to teach that course was not renewed, despite my excellent student evaluations. And taking account of all the institutional bad actions of the last year, I resigned in protest from all my remaining commitments. So you might reasonably be asking, what does psychoanalysis have to do with this, except that I lost a job for teaching it properly? And to answer that, we have to go way back, which is one of the favorite things of all psychoanalysts to do. So going way back, a psychoanalyst was the creator of modern propaganda. Edward Bernays, who's Freud's nephew, he was actually Freud's double nephew because the parents were related. So he was Freud's nephew and an analyst himself, and he made his fortune by taking what he learned from psychoanalysis and using it to develop what he called public relations. In particular, he was taken with Freud's very racist and otherwise misguided thinking about the primal horde in civilization and its discontents. Bernays figured that he could use psychoanalytic insights and engage in, quote, conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses, end quote. This is a quote, by the way, from his book entitled Propaganda. He became much in demand for this, being hired variously by the US government and several truly evil corporations to engage in psychological warfare against poor people all over the world trying to uplift themselves. Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, was known to be a great fan of Edward Bernays and to have used his ideas to advance the Third Reich through propaganda and psyops. In other words, the Nazis used psychoanalysis to attack psychoanalysis, burning Freud's books while employing the ideas within them. And this is all to say that the psychological warfare and manipulation of public opinion to serve authoritarian ends, these are an old psychoanalytic tradition, actually, as is psychoanalysis being hoisted on its own petard. So fast forward.
Did I check it out? No.
A little over 10 years ago now, a group of transphobic psychoanalysts got together to promote the view that being trans is a socially contagious mental disorder. This was and remains an insane thing to believe, not least because all gender is contagious, that is to say, socially transmitted and learned. Object relations, anyone, identification. It's also, and relatedly, a claim for which there was no reliable or valid evidence. This remains the case. So its proponents, people like Lisa Marchiano, a psychoanalyst who's the host of This Jungian Life podcast, and Roberto D'Angelo, who's the former president of IARP Australia. These folks went to great lengths to lodge pseudoscience in the peer-reviewed scholarly discourse to make it easier to pretend that their claim wasn't bullshit. To this end, they published articles in marginal psychoanalytic journals, which had long ago slackened their peer review standards so much that it was easy for pseudoscience to get in. And this legitimation of transphobia and transphobic conversion therapy was very exciting for numerous entities on the fascist Christian right in the United States. Since the late 1970s, when homosexuality was delisted from the DSM over the fervent objections of psychoanalyst conversion therapists, some of whom are still alive, by the way. Vomit Volkan was one of these people who gets kind of propped up as a paragon of human rights. He was one of the 12 people who, after the APA voted to delist homosexuality from the DSM, he actually tried to make a motion to get them to reconsider that, which is not exactly human rights sounding to me. But since the 1970s kind of move away from frank homophobia in psychoanalysis, the fascist Christian right has taken in these psychoanalysts who were so hostile to gay people that they could not continue to operate in less homophobic psychoanalytic institutions. These psychoanalysts became essential, useful idiots for fascists, giving their bogus claims about marginalized groups the veneer of medical and philosophical legitimacy, while the reputation of psychoanalysis has waned within academia, outside of it, psychoanalysis is still a synonym for fanciest therapy and carries considerable cachet for the universe of people for whom like their exposure to psychoanalysis is like the movie Analyze This. Continuously since the 1980s, there has been a reciprocal relationship between anti-queer psychoanalysts and fascists. The anti-queer psychoanalysts provide symbolic capital to the fascists, and the fascists provide economic capital or access thereto through things like help with book publishing to the psychoanalysts. Fascists always believed that there are too many minorities, but since World War II, it's become more untenable, at least for now, no evil eye, for American fascists to say that the solution to this problem is to murder minorities. Instead, it is seen as more politically palatable to find ways of claiming some combination of A, people who are minorities aren't really minorities because they're, for example, foreigners who just belong somewhere else to whence you might deport them, and or B, that they believe that they are minorities because they are insane. And the solution is therefore to cure them of this insanity and make them normal again to assimilate them into the majority. And psychoanalysts are exceptionally useful idiots for the propagation and justification of this belief. In the last 10 years, we have seen an extraordinary revival of this relationship between psychoanalysts and fascists, which never ended, but was ebbing. According to the landmark Captain report by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which you should really read, if somebody wants to put that in the chat, I'd be grateful. Psychoanalysts like Marciano and D'Angelo were the leading clinical actors in a fascist campaign to use anti-trans propaganda as a wedge issue to split the left and drive the fascist right to power. Propaganda and pseudoscience they created was the instrument used by organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, who overturned Roe v. Wade and who represent homophobic plaintiffs like Three Creative and Masterpiece Cake Shop at the Supreme Court, to justify the idea that being trans is a mental disorder cultivated by groomers, which could mean anything from online influencers to teachers to, in particular, therapists. Parenthetically, those of you who are students of anti-Semitism will remember that this idea of groomers actually originates with anti-Semitic blood libels in the Middle Ages. But that no great surprise that that's being revived right now. And the leading propagandists of the fascist right have written books with titles like Irreversible Damage and Bad Therapy, making these claims, extensively quoting analysts like Marciano, who popularized them and smuggled them into the peer-reviewed scholarly discourse. And maybe most strikingly, psychoanalysts, specifically a psychoanalyst named Joseph Burgo, who by his own account has been rejected by his trans child, originated the idea that trans activists are actually malignant and character disordered, that they are hostile narcissists demanding obedience to their wishes, like to be called by the correct pronouns. Burgo, who has long been a pop psych proponent, he promoted pop psychoanalytic understandings of character disordered leftists in far-right outlets like Tucker Carlson's Daily Caller, which were then taken and run with by the leading fascist propagandists of the day. And the result is Chris Rufo, who is the leading propagandist of the fascist right, whose role in the movement merits comparisons to both Goebbels and Bernays. It leads to Rufo arguing that we now live in what he calls a cluster B society. And Rufo argues that all the ills of the moment are caused by the fact that the entirety of the left has developed cluster B, that is narcissistic, borderline, hysterical, antisocial traits due to internet social contagion, which again is an idea that Marciano popularized, and that the solution is to frustrate us until we are cured and maybe to control the internet for good measure just in case. We will be cured, in this view, by having the government institutionalize and discipline us until we are free of the mind virus, to use a phrase popularized by Lisa Marciano in the era when she was writing about these issues on the internet under an assumed name, like a totally normal psychoanalyst who is not suspicious at all. This is all to say that psychoanalysts have been intellectual leaders feeding ideas to the fascist right that they then mobilized in propaganda and governance at the highest levels. And not just any ideas, but the most influential ones, right? Ones that the White House put on its website like the day after they were inaugurated as their top 5 priorities for the new administration. This was true in the 1930s, and it's true in the 2020s. Psychoanalysts gave fascists the idea to say that their enemy is mentally diseased and needs to be cured, not in the 1940s, but in the 2020s. It's not an exaggeration to say that we are in the situation we are in as a society in no small part because a handful of clout-chasing psychoanalysts found common cause with fascists. So this is the part of the story in which psychoanalysts venture out beyond the profession to serve as useful idiots for fascism in the wider society, but that's only half of the story. Fascist propagandists and activists also actively recruited and engaged in psyops within the psychoanalytic profession. And they did this for several reasons. For one, having seen that so many of their intellectual leaders were psychoanalysts, it probably became obvious that there was a much more significant contingent of psychoanalysts who could be made amenable to fascist ideas than one might have thought. And I go very far into why that is in my book, but that's too much for today. But for another, psychoanalysis was increasingly a hub of anti-fascist intellectual sentiment and activism within academia and medicine. Hello? A fact that fascists knew they could use to diverse ends. If they could capitalize upon divisions in the profession, they could identify both their fellow travelers and leftist analysts whom they could persecute online to chum the waters of the fascist internet. Anti-academic hate content was and remains a major industry on the fascist right. And I say industry because it makes a huge amount of money. An online propaganda ecosystem that ran from meme pages like Libs of TikTok and a million others to supposed watchdog sites like the aforementioned Canary Mission and Professor Watch and Campus Watch and many more, straight up to Tucker Carlson's Fox News show. All of these thrived by creating hate and cringe content about leftist academics. Starting in 2021, fascist propagandists identified leftist psychoanalysts whose work they could feed into this online hate ecosystem to generate emotional and political energy. They started with Aruna Kilanani, who gave a provocative talk at Yale Grand Rounds that was recorded for internal consumption at Yale and then leaked to a right-wing journalist. Then they moved on to Donald Moss and Derek Hook, both of whom had written or presented scholarly work on in pretty niche, frankly, venues. And these three cases had several things in common. All of these people were doing critical psychoanalytic work on whiteness. They all wound up on Fox News and the New York Post repeatedly. They all received truly frightening, specific, non-anonymous death threats to themselves, and in Hook's case, to his children. And they were all pilloried for work that could, barring extraordinary, only have been known about by a psychoanalytic insider, which suggests that in all three cases, it was psychoanalysts who told the fascist propagandists about them. I'm almost positive I know who did it. I'll likely never be able to prove it definitively. Still, if you're watching this, I see you and you are a total asshole. Woo. This strategy reached its zenith in the campaign against my friend Lara Shihab. By the time Shihab came under fire, the relationships between fascist sympathizing psychoanalysts and outside fascist activists were well established. Shihab was the target of a pro-Israel activist organization called Stand With Us, which lodged a complaint against her and her employer, the George Washington University, with the US Department of Education. That complaint was leaked to a far-right online newspaper, the Washington Free Beacon, before it was actually submitted to the Department of Education. This makes it clear that Stand With Us was seeking to persecute Shihab in this online hate ecosystem, especially because they redacted out the names of every other party to the complaint except for her. And incidentally, this week, coincidentally, Jill Abramson wrote about the Free Beacon in the Boston Globe, and she detailed how it was seed funded by right-wing billionaire Paul Singer, second right-wing billionaire of the day here. It was co-founded by a Coke industry strategist, and it's trying to produce conservative combat journalism, that's their phrase, that's the Free Beacon's own phrase, targeted at universities and academics. So once the Free Beacon article was released, Shihab was inundated with death and rape threats online as the story ramified out across the hate ecosystem. Importantly, though, the story served a vital function within psychoanalysis itself, as I contend was actually part of its purpose. So a lot of you know Lara Shihab, and you know, therefore, that she's a singular figure. She is young and charismatic. She is the first woman of color to lead a major American psychoanalytic organization. She's also a leading anti-fascist intellectual and critic of Israel and of Zionism. And she's consequently a figure of fear and loathing for a considerable number of psychoanalysts who are committed to Zionist politics, and an intellectual leader of a new psychoanalysis in which the old guard is not granted authority automatically. She is, in other words, very threatening to the psychoanalytic powers that have been, a threat to their sense of authority and to the financial and symbolic benefits that flow from that authority. Many such people were eager to see her discredited and to see her unable to lead within the field. Here was a perfect alignment of the interests of authoritarian, often Zionist psychoanalysts and the interests of the fascists. The psychoanalysts could use the fascists and their online hate ecosystem as a weapon to cut Shihab down. The fascists could benefit from all the heat this manufactured scandal generated online, using it as an opportunity to prove that psychology was now irretrievably woke and dangerous, confirming the argument that transphobic psychoanalysts like Lisa Marchiano, Roberto D'Angelo, and Joseph Burgo, and their fascist allies like Chris Rufo and Abigail Schreier, that all these people had been making for years. It served fascist interests on Israel, on trans issues, on academia, and on medicine and psychology all at once. So fascist organizers paid to have billboard trucks with Lara and Stephen Shihab's picture on them, emblazoned with accusations that they were anti-Semites, drive around the APA Division 39 conference a couple years ago for some 12 hours straight. Many of you were there and remember that. I have the photos on my phone. They worked to keep the story alive in as many venues as possible, some of them evidently funded by Israeli propaganda groups. I have the British government tax receipts to prove it. Others run by fascist psychoanalysts themselves. And just like the psychoanalytic transphobes before them, they wrote hit pieces with flagrant, frankly, defamatory factual errors and got them published in clout-chasing, low-rent psychoanalytic journals with no meaningful peer review standards. That's a funny story in itself that maybe we can talk about sometime. So the objective of this campaign was to cut off the head of the leader of an organization and movement the fascists feared, on the theory that this would demonstrate weakness within the movement, frighten people, and send the organization and movement into disarray that would serve fascist interests. Chris Rufo has specifically and publicly stated that this is his goal because it, quote, demoralizes and deranges my enemies, end quote. He sounds lovely. They beta tested the strategy on Shihab, and when they saw how successful it was, they then picked new and bigger targets. They picked the presidents of Ivy League universities, chiefly Harvard and Penn. If they could TKO the presidents of these universities, they could strike fear into the institutions, send them into disarray, and begin to turn these universities, and universities more broadly, towards fascist purposes. They could make universities figures of public loathing whose money they could then steal to compensate a bit for all the money they lost their government by giving tax cuts to their billionaire oligarch friends like Bill Ackman and Paul Singer. Universities could also be forced to treat fascist ideas as if they were legitimately within the Overton window for fear of being destroyed if they refused. And this is, not coincidentally, what the Nazis did to the Berlin Psychoanalytic Institute. They didn't close it. They forced out all the undesirables, Jews from their perspective, appointed a new fascist director, Matthias Göring, who was Hermann Göring's cousin, and they had the institution keep doing the things the fascists liked. In that case, it was conversion therapy for gay Nazi soldiers, because by that point, the psychoanalysts had gotten really good at conversion therapy. Oh, when they took down a portrait of Freud and hung up a portrait of Hitler. The next step in this process is also prefigured in the Shihab situation. Create an environment in which professors are either fired outright or forced to resign because their jobs have become impossible to do, especially if they fear ongoing persecution by the federal government for example, assigning provocative books. That's what just happened to me at Penn, of course. So how do we fight back? I have a lot to say about anti-fascist psychoanalytic theory, and maybe we can explore that during question time if there's an appetite for that. But I'm going to stay action-oriented for now, and I'm going to focus my tactical commentary on the target demo of this talk, which is people who are academics and or practicing clinicians, and therefore people who have already completed their degree-granting educations. But in case there are any current students in the audience, here is my advice to you, which may differ from some other people's, and that's fine. Don't get got right now, if you can help it. Your job right now is to survive this moment, keep learning, and keep your powder dry. You can take your degree around the world if needed, like many of our persecuted ancestors did, but only if you get it. You have a decades-long fight ahead of you, and you cannot get burnt out or extinguished at the start of it. Your school provides you with extraordinary things: access to teachers and colleagues, at least a few of whom will hopefully share your passions and convictions, a library staffed with librarians who are amazing, big ups to librarians, who can eventually get you anything you would ever want to read, shared spaces in which to be together. The most important things you will do at school will happen in what Fred Moten calls the undercommons, outside of official channels, because your university, especially if it's a fancy one, is likely too frightened to risk giving you a serious education right now. Find your people, keep learning together, and don't forget that you can cold email any scholar you respect and ask them to come talk to you and your friends. And anyone who is not too big for their britches will be honored to be asked. If you invite me, I will come hang, to the point where you might get sick of me. Much of this advice obviously obtains for any clinician or academic right now, but there are different risks and considerations. Academics, particularly contingent faculty adjuncts, need to be afraid of losing our jobs. And the fascists know that our massively specialized training makes us terrified that we will be unemployable outside of academia. And that can understandably lead us to quiet down right at the moment when we need to be the loudest and the bravest. Clinicians are somewhat fortunate. For all the bullshit and underpayment and risk involved in our work, we can generally get some kind of job somewhere. And that's because we have in-demand trade skills and licenses that insulate us from some of the worst effects of the current fascist onslaught for now. For academics, we cannot rely on institutional norms to protect us. They're just broken. We may be able to fix them at some point, but it's not right now. We need to rely on each other through both legally recognized and unrecognized unions. The federal government doesn't need to recognize your union for you to be able to be effective activists. And we need to rely on ourselves, by realizing that it's not a failure to be a scholar who also does other kinds of work. Fanon, he wrote books, he cared for patients, and he ran guns for the Algerian Revolution. Wendell Berry has run his farm for over 50 years while writing something like 50 books. I write and teach and I see patients, and like Wendell, I've decided to run a first name basis. I spend an awful lot of time running a farm that can feed me and keep me warm, and I do lots of odd jobs for friends and all manner of other scroungy things. Now is the time to learn the skills that will keep you safe, keep you solvent, and let you be brave. Learn from the artists. Do whatever else you have to do to keep doing your work. Fascists have developed a strategy that allows them to manipulate the weaknesses of the university to hobble and frighten us. They're able to do this because the university was already, in important ways, authoritarian and contained the mechanisms to control us. But it's not half as authoritarian as the Psychoanalytic Institute, which is one of the many reasons that I have argued for abolishing it, including in another talk with this fine institution that you can find on their wonderful website. Authoritarian institutions will not come to save us from other authoritarians. Not going to happen. Fortunately, we do not need the university or any other authoritarian institution to learn, work, or fight. What we need is each other. Because the fascist strategy is to seize control of institutions, they really struggle to combat a decentralized, deinstitutionalized resistance. They use the levers of institutional power until those don't work, and then they turn to vigilante violence. How to respond to that is another talk, but you might want to check out the work of Malcolm X and Scott Crow on that issue. That's all I'll say. And white-collar resistance to fascism often struggles to form because we are so institutionalized that we have difficulty imagining a world beyond them, particularly those of us who have committed to professional managerial stability. And so we actually need to learn how to be better at being more unstable. It is very difficult to fuck with people doing their learning and teaching in living rooms, dive bars, and Zoom calls like this one. While legacy publishers might be afraid of being sued by fascists with infinite money and an amenable judiciary, it's eminently possible to engage in self-publication, including with a very high standard of peer review, which I do not think can be left out, with some coordination. There's a long tradition of anarchists publishing their own work, including publishing pseudonymously or anonymously. If you're willing to sacrifice the idea of credit because the ideas are more important than their attribution or your brownie points within an academic, bean counting system, you can say a lot of things you might otherwise be frightened to say. And there's a lot to be said for, to paraphrase Gabriel Tupinamba, freeing thought from thinkers in the coming insurrection. There's a lot to be said for DIY. Psychoanalytic institutions are not DIY, however much they may pretend to be. They have shown absolutely nothing but cowardice in response to the rise of fascism worldwide. They had nothing to say about a genocide we all watched unfold in Gaza that continues to unfold now. Institutional psychoanalysis is unprincipled, greedy, and pathetic. It does not deserve one moment of your attention or your service. Now is the time to abandon these feckless institutions and build something else for yourself. And while we're at it, frankly, this is just my superego talking at you now, but so it goes. You should be devastated by the thought of being remembered as a collaborator in this historical moment. Do not be someone whose conduct in this moment would shame your descendants. Do what is needed to protect the people who need to be protected. Be like Viktor Frankl, who was willing to lie to hide his patients from people who sought to harm them. Hold fast to the truth. Do not concede. Refuse to do the wrong thing. Remember that the way psychoanalysts act right now will affect whether people see us as worthy of trust for generations. Be someone worthy of trust. Oh, and consider being a slut. We've arrived at dessert. Whatever sort of slut is meaningful to you, whether in the immortal words of Kim Petras, a butt slut, in which slut has two T's on the end, amazing coinage, or like me in the late Anthony Bourdain, a burger slut. I'm a beef cattle farmer. To be a psychoanalyst is to devote oneself to the study of pleasure. Yet, how often does psychoanalysis feel devoid of it, especially now? Fascism mirrors Kernberg's understanding of severe narcissism in that it involves a fundamental subordination of the erotic to the aggressive. And to fight it, we need to be able to let our eroticism drive our ethical aggression. I think this is what Adrienne Marie Brown means when she talks about pleasure activism. And if we're going to help other people do this, we need to practice what we preach. So if you need to punch a Nazi, do so in the sluttiest possible fashion. I'm obviously not telling you to punch a Nazi. I'm just saying, if you feel so moved, show a little ankle. Ta-da. Don't be theoretically monogamous. Read in the sluttiest possible way. Don't feel you need to study in a way where you get credentialed, particularly if you already have a graduate degree, in which the institution is willing to put a ring on it. Keep coming to Shears events. Come check out P-Hole and our benevolent host at the Asian American Center for Psychoanalysis. There's, Rendering Unconscious has a new kind of educational effort. There's so many things you can try. Talking about psychoanalysis is not just for the consulting room or the classroom. Consider doing it outside, maybe even with people you don't know. Be psychoanalytically promiscuous. Insist on pleasure. Let fighting fascism spark joy. Let learning feel like you're getting away with something, because these days you really are. Thus concludes prepared remarks. So let me look at all of you now. Let's see the little chat action. Oh, you're very kind with the clapping.
Yes, definitely.
Not at all. No, that was not a request. That was an observation, but that's very embarrassing. Yeah. So
But it
cosign.
is gratitude.
Well, the gratitude is very mutual. So the Carolyn, you were very kind. My Substack is entitled Psychoanalyst, Psychospace Analyst, and we can link that again in the chat. And then the book is in a perpetual limbo. It's called Bound to Lose: How Fascism Came for Psychoanalysis. Yeah. So, what do we want to talk about, everybody? I'm here for you. You are more than welcome to throw things in the chat that you would like us to take up. You are more than welcome to jump in here. Andrew, I see, has raised a hand. What you got, Andrew?
Hi, yeah, thank you. That was really informative. Hello, everyone. I am yeah, I'm calling from London, where we mercifully don't have Trump, but we absolutely do have quite a conservative pushback, both like legislatively and kind of activistly, that's not a word, on like things like
Oh,
trans issues.
a lot of it's
And
in the UK, where it's easier to get sued for talking about this.
absolutely, and J.K. Rowling loves her lawyers, and Palestinian actions, Palestinian solidarity, absolutely like massively pushed back. My question is around like that. I really like the idea of like deinstitutionalizing ourselves and becoming just stepping back from those institutions that, again, in the UK have done a lot of very direct harms to particularly trans people. But I guess that tension of like, um, if I was so in the UK cultural context, if I was to deregister myself from like the kind of the institutions I need to be a part of, there's a risk that basically clients would sort of think that I was a quack, and therefore that I'm not one of these institutions because I'm not qualified to be with one of these institutions. And just kind of, and then as I say that, I acknowledge the kind of cowardice basically kind of
No, that's a
that.
legit dilemma. And it's easier for me to say this. This is sort of why I like, in the beginning, like I do draw a distinction between like, if you're getting your degree, in the US context, let's say, you're in a different situation, right? And I don't begrudge anybody who's trying to, it would be really irrational to shit on somebody for trying to get through their degree program when we know that like the telos of these kinds of authoritarian movements often create mass migrations where people need to be able to get a job in another country. So yeah, I think that there's a real, for me, a categorical difference between getting a degree, getting a license, and like what happens after that. But I think that I'm also a bad anarchist in that way, and like I could be more fundamentalist about like the negotiation of the state licensing system. But I'm other people are. There's a song about that. I'm a better anarchist than you. I am not a better anarchist than you. But I'm terribly sorry. I interrupted the end of your thought there.
No,
That was
no.
my.
Yeah, just I mean, in the UK anyway, you're sort of like incumbent to sort of like, so I've already qualified, but like there's a sort of that tension of like, if you're a completely sort of if you're not plugged into any of the institutions,
Mhm.
then I guess I'm sort of how we kind of from the outside kind of delegitimize institutionalization, if that makes sense. Like, if is there a way where we can kind of make sure the gold sticker kind of loses its power so that these institutions sort of don't have the kind of I guess I'm thinking of the kind of regulatory bodies in the UK. Like, how do we like shift them? How do we kind of take the power back from them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, because you're in the position where, so for those of you who are not avid watchers of the UK dilemma here, unlike in the United States, where prior to Trump 2.0, organizations like the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association were actually pretty forcefully pushing back on anti-trans propaganda and pseudoscience. The British Council, I forget the exact name of it, the British counseling regulatory body went in the other direction because they were successfully Trotsky'd basically by transphobic fascists. And so it's a dilemma. I think that if I'm talking in terms of pure strategy, it's to one's advantage to have fancy institutions in the same paragraph as your name. That's something I tell my students all the time. And I think if you look at my CV, that's a strategy that I have pursued. One thing I would say is publishing in good journals, can for certain audience members can fulfill a similar function, particularly if you're able to clearly articulate why you are disaffiliating from certain of these institutions, that like there is a constituency of people who will actually be relieved by that fact, I imagine. I'm a little bit ignorant of the logistics of finding patients under the national health scheme. That's not my world. But in general, like, you know, the journals are not going anywhere, and we get to write in those venues the kind of things that we believe are good if we are sufficiently skilled as academicians. And that can serve an analogous merit badging function. And we know that because that's what the fascists did. Right. So a lot of the, you know, regrettably, like a lot of the lessons for how one can operate here, we learn from watching how they acted, which is to say that they had no cred and no clout, and then they won it. And the problem wasn't that they did that. The problem is that their ideas were bad. And so there are certain lessons to be derived from that, I think, however distasteful that might be. Which I know is not a wholly satisfactory response.
No, it was
Robin,
actually, thank you. I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not anti-clout chasing necessarily. Robin, were you gonna?
Yeah, hi. So, I'm curious, do you have any ideas or thoughts or recommendations for how, say, people who are in institutes and before leaving, or institutes themselves could change this? Like, what could people in institutes do, or what could the leadership of institutes do to not be affiliated, to not perpetuate the march towards fascism? What could change?
I think nothing, and I'll tell you why I think that.
Okay.
So what, you know, in actually the last talk I gave with this august organization being a strong word for sheer having really good taste, or so I'd like to think. I basically give this talk on abolishing the institute, right? And the argument that I make in that context, and you can read about it on my Substack or watch the video of that, is that the Psychoanalytic Institute is an inherently authoritarian institution, right?
Mm.
Specifically that it functions like a chamber of commerce and like a pyramid scheme, right? Where the entire edifice is organized in such a manner as to drive economic capital and emotional fealty to the top of the hierarchy. And if the institute does not function in that way, it instantly collapses. It just ceases to work. And we've seen that happen too. So to me, like that whole model is fundamentally unworkable in this moment in time. And we see that because again, like Roberto D'Angelo is one of the leading fascist propagandist clinicians in the world, right? And the organizations that he runs are sources of extraordinary destructiveness. And he's fully credentialed. His credibility derives from association with the Analytic Institute system, right? When you read the profile of somebody like Joseph Burgo, you know, the primary way that he advertises himself is via an affiliation through the Psychoanalytic Institute system. And part of the reason that they're able to do that is because if you are willing to get in at the ground floor of the institute system and pay your dues, at a certain point, authority is inevitable, right? If you cooperate for long enough. And so to my mind, it's the most powerful thing we can do is boycott them and divest from them en masse, right? Be rid of them and make a big show of it. And I think a lot of the time, the reason people are afraid to do that, there are legitimate economic anxieties, okay? But those are resolvable. But the bigger anxieties are around community. I think that, you know, the reason that many people feel such a cathexis to their institutes is because that's the world of, you know, professional and indeed just like social community that they found. It's not a coincidence that so many analysts are married to each other, right? You know, these are enormous communal hubs. And so the solution, you know, if for those of us who are calling for the end of this system, it's then incumbent upon us to like build a community that a person would want to be a part of, right? And that's where, to me, like the thing about being fun comes in, right? Like it, you know, I tended to experience the social atmosphere of analytic institutes as feeling like eating oyster crackers for dinner, like dry and unsatisfying. Um, and you know, the experiences I've had in these you know, decentralized DIY, like punk analytic environments where like we're not in an institution, we're part of a scene, right? There are bands people like, there are venues that people go to because there's sometimes a kind of person that they like to meet there, right? But also sometimes you just go to somebody's basement and get sweaty and weird, right? Like that I think is the vital function that we have to do a good job of serving. And it's actually not easy, right? Being a good host is work, right? As Sheer well knows. Being, you know, having a community of people who don't all necessarily share the same vibe or interests is a project, right? But we're more than capable of doing that. And I think that we also know that this is the thing I talk to my students. The day after Trump got elected, we had like a late night meeting in the library with me and my undergrads where we talked about this. Because they were very sad. And the thing I tried to tell them is if you look at the examples, particularly of long-standing authoritarian regimes, okay, so that's not the Nazis and the Italian fascists. That's like Franco, Salazar in Portugal, which is what my family ran away from. If you look at the example of like the kind of former Soviet bloc, right, where, you know, where people found community was like at music shows and dive bars and cafes and house parties where people read poetry of pretty varying qualities. Václav Havel was good, but there was probably a lot that was not so good. And having that social world, right, untethered from any particular institution, creates affinities where people actually care about each other, right? And it creates environments where it's much easier for people to protect more vulnerable members of the community, not through an appeal to an institution to say, you know, like it's one thing for my university to say, like, you know, here's our instructions for dealing with ICE, which is great. I'm glad that they do that. I'm not against it. But it's another thing for somebody to know that they can like wave me like, ugh, and then there's somebody who has to get in my car and we have to go drive away. You know what I mean? Like the second thing happens because you know and trust each other. And that's, I think, where we have some work to do. And it's hard because we're on the internet, whatever. But to me, that's the goal. And the dilemma is that it is a lot of work to build a scene. It's a lot of work to be the one who hosts the parties. So thank you again, Sheer. But we need more Sheers. Right. That's sort of the objective of P-hole and a lot of these other things, is that people got fed up enough that they wanted to like throw their own party. And like, there's absolutely no reason why everybody here cannot throw their own party. You know what I mean? Like, I want to come to your party. I definitely want to come to Chaim's party. Chaim's been part of that punk scene for a long time too, so he knows how to throw down.
I am not unfamiliar with the dynamics of the mosh pit. Good morning. Hi, it's so very lovely to see you.
Hello. By the way, Chaim is Dr. Rochester now. Round of applause. I got to be in the dissertation defense. It was really very good. So watch for the book.
Oh God. Well, we have to. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
It's going to be a banger.
This is great, and I'm curious. So I had this thing happen the other day, and I'm bringing it up because I would love to just talk to you about the thing separately, but I think the dynamics of it. Back to the propaganda conversation. So as you know, and maybe some of you here know, I have a habit of sending loud emails in response to other bullshit email threads.
You tapped in for me when I stopped doing that because my wife told me I wasn't allowed to anymore.
Yeah, I don't have I have the disadvantage of not having one of those to stop me. So I just do my thing. But somebody recently looped me into it. So there was just for context, there was the APA hosted a Zoom thing about like, let's discuss anti-Semitism the other week, and stakeholders, whoever those were deemed to be, got invited, and I somehow got a backdoor invitation, so I jumped in, and it was a bunch of sort of Zionist tears and weird rhetoric, and Then there was an email that went out to a group of people after the fact, unsolicited, like this kind of blast. That was some pretty distorted, whatever. Somebody forwarded me the email, so I responded to the reply all because the person didn't employ email hygiene by BCCing. So I was like, great, you're all going to hear from me. So I said a couple things, and then what I find later, a couple days ago, some reporter from a publication, Jewish Insider, published like a lengthy sort of thing about it. And what's interesting to me, and this is the dynamic, I wonder if you have thoughts about it, or if it sends us in an interesting direction. I was cited without attribution and out of context, naturally, saying, quote, one psychologist, me apparently, referred to the substance of the Zoom call as, quote, propaganda, and said he would denounce only, quote, actual anti-Semitism, which is true. That is what I said in my email, like, because they're trying to—
That sounds pretty good.
Right? And so, but what in this article, she cites without context and without naming me as a person with a name and also a Jewish person with a Jewish name, and then says this other, like Karen Suyamoto, who has been involved in this other stuff, like agreed with this clinician, basically tries to imply that Karen is anti-Semitic for agreeing with my decontextualized, sort of implicitly anti-Semitic comment.
Yeah.
So she's like using me, absenting my Jewishness in this comment, and then branding somebody else as anti-Semitic for like aligning with me in this interesting, fucked up way.
Yeah.
And so it's gross and distorted and unethical, but what I'm curious about, not from a, I don't know, it opens up a lot of questions for me, because the fascist right, or the fascists, whoever they want to think of themselves, have gotten really good and very deliberate and unapologetic about like lawfare and tactics and all these like legally sort of journalistic malpractice type of things. So other than just sort of refusing to be quiet, I'm wondering about sort of what is a counter response, like how, I don't know, what do we do with all this mess? And I'm not looking for advice from you, but just like generally.
Yeah, I mean that, my level of, inflamed outrage at that was so substantial that I wrote a book about it. So, which is basically a book about collecting the receipts, right? And one of the dilemmas that I've run into is, emails are a gray area under US copyright law. So notionally, you own the copyright on any email that you send. And technically, if it's quoted without your permission, you have grounds to sue. And the reason I know that is because I was not allowed to put incredibly incriminating emails that are in my possession in my book because my publisher was afraid of getting sued. My counterpoint to that was, well, all of these fascist propaganda newspapers seem to do it with abandon. So what gives? And then I don't have a good response to that. But the kind of larger point of this dilemma is like, they're bullshitting. Let me tell you a little meta story about this. So a couple of years ago, I was invited by this journal called Free Associations to respond to a hit piece about Lara Shihah that was written by Daniel Burstyn and Carrie Nelson. And you can Google Carrie Nelson in particular to get a sense of the history of that individual. And that article just like lied. It verifiably lied. They attributed quotations to Lara and Stephen in Psychoanalysis Under Occupation that do not occur in the book, right? I have a PDF copy of that book such that I was able to search it, and the lines that they attribute are not in the manuscript. So they just lied. And it was not caught by peer review because whether it was actually peer reviewed or not is unclear. The journal claims that they engage in peer review, but they didn't peer review my reply. They agreed to publish it exactly as is at my request, which I requested in part to prove that they weren't doing peer review. So the title of that article is Bullshit, Response to Burstyn and Nelson. When Free Associations published it, they expurgated my title, so they refused to give it. I was the only piece that didn't have a title, which also then makes it impossible to search for. I don't know whether it's still up there because my computer can't access their website. I have gone on other people's computers and been able to access their website, but not from my own, which suggests that my IP address might have been blocked by the journal. Um, and so in that reply, which was the seed for this book that I wrote, what I argued is that the authors were bullshitting, and that the operational definition of bullshit is a rhetorical stance that is indifferent to the truth, that is invested in the gestalt of a particular position, and then makes utterances, some true, some not, in order to like basically arrive at the desired conclusion. And the problem with bullshit is on the internet, people talk about Brandolini's law, which is kind of a gag way of saying it takes an order of magnitude more effort to refute bullshit than to produce it in the first place. So that's sort of the problem that you run into when you're having to try to do this kind of anti-fascist rhetorical work. And ultimately, like, I found that direct engagement is futile for this reason. Like, you know, it's pretty Sisyphean, and yeah, you could say we must imagine Sisyphus happy, but I was not. Um, and so what I settled on was, in all the work I'm doing, including the work I'm here to do with you today, I'm trying to establish an historical record of like what's actually true. It may have no effect right now, right? But the best I can do is like log for posterity what actually went down. But the other voice I'm hearing in my head as you narrate this is Lara Shihab, who has a lot of critical things to say about like the kind of liberal dialogic stance and dialogue initiatives. And the lesson that I feel like I've learned from her is, yeah, like dialogue is great in certain situations where there's actually sufficient symmetry between the parties and sufficient like sincere goodwill that you can like have a meaningful exchange. But if that's absent, then dialogue is actually benefiting the person with the shittiest position, right? And so trying to like have an argument with fascists is like just super completely self-defeating. And it also gives credence to them as like a reasonable interlocutor, which I have no interest in doing because they're not. And then it's incumbent upon me to prove that they're not by showing how completely unreasonable they are, right? Because not for nothing, they do sus insane things all the time. Stacey, I'm really sorry. I was rambling so much that I saw your hand and then it went away, and I'm wondering if you might want to come back, or did we settle the matter?
You know, just write you personally. First of all, thank you, dear Dr. Carter.
I live to serve.
I just wondered, you know, and maybe this stems from my own anxiety, but you're very open, you're very direct, you seem to not hesitate at all giving your opinion. I admire your ability to speak in such a manner. In this current legal atmosphere, do you worry about that?
I have several attorneys, which is the reason I am able to do this. So I am a public university professor, which means that I am a member in good standing of the National Educators Association, the NEA, which is the largest by numbers labor union in the United States of America. And the NEA, if anyone issues any challenge to me about anything I do in the course of my scholarly work, including this, including anything I publish, I will have representation and the backing of a union with 3 million members. And so this is why I say, right, like we need unions. Unions are the bulwark against fascism. They're the only institution that has any meaningful record of fighting back and reducing harm at scale, right? And part of how we see this is like, you know, yes, there's examples in European history. The really striking example is in Israel, where you know Palestinians are not allowed to join most labor unions, right? That doesn't mean that they don't unionize and fight, and they do, and they win, and it works. But like, there's a clear recognition that in that context, it would be very, very destabilizing to the Israeli government for Palestinians to be able to unionize en masse as workers. So like, my number one advice to anyone would be, try to contrive to be in a union. If you teach at a community college in any blue state as an adjunct, if you teach there for long enough, you get unit status. You're a member. In Massachusetts, you have to teach a few classes over a couple of semesters for your unit status to take effect. Right now, I'm one of the lead bargainers on my union contract team, and we're trying to win immediate unit status for our adjuncts so that they're protected right away against things like this. But there's a lot of things that you can. There are, for people with an advanced degree, pathways to union membership that can afford you protections that are not accessible by other means. But the other piece about being in community with this is that there are movement lawyers who you would never meet if you were not out here doing the thing, right? So those are not necessarily people that in your kind of give and go of your life right now you would encounter. But like when I needed help, those people came out of the woodwork because they don't announce themselves, they don't make a big deal about themselves, but that's what they do. And so I would absolutely not have the chutzpah to do what I'm doing if I did not have legal representation that didn't cost me money. And part of why I feel it's a sense of special obligation to like be far out in front with this stuff is because I have that and a lot of you don't. And that's a privilege that I want to take fullest advantage of. And then the one other thing that I'm going to say before I go to Joe, who I'm excited, I think Joe's got an excellent new job, and I'm going to see him in September sometime, you should know what is defamation and what is not. So to defame someone, you have to say something that is untrue, that you know to be untrue, and you need to say it for the purpose of causing harm to that individual. So it is by definition never defamatory to say something that is true, right? So if I'm gonna, in a few days, post the text of this talk to my Substack, and you're gonna see I'm gonna hyperlink the bejesus out of that thing because I'm gonna establish that the provocative claims that I'm making are demonstrably true, right? And something is not defamatory if it is squarely the purview of your opinion. So if you say this person is an asshole, or for that matter, this person is a fascist, right? The definitions of asshole and fascist are moving targets. I mean, I am very specific about my definition of those two terms, and I'm glad to tell you what it is if you want to know. But that is within the purview of your personal opinion, and that's not defamatory either, right? So fascists have in the United States, this is different. My colleague in the UK, I'm very sorry, it's a tougher situation there. They have fairly limited legal tools to take action against people for speech. And if you know the rules and you studiously follow the rules, they actually can't get you. And the one last thing I'll say before I go to Joe is this. So I know that a number of you in this room have the experience of being threatened with being sued by fascist colleagues. And then they don't actually do it. And I'll tell you why they don't do it. If they sue you, you can depose them. And they don't want to get deposed because they do bad stuff all the time that's supposed to be a secret. So they're going to make all kinds of noise to be like, you defamed me, you affected my professional reputation, and you can expect to hear from my counsel. It's like, I would fucking love to hear from your counsel. I would love to, because I will depose the shit out of you and get the receipts. Try. Like, fuck around and find out. They never do it because they know what they did. So, like, do not be fooled by this smoke and mirrors nonsense that they pull, right? They are hiding things. And they're going to keep acting like, and they will reveal how much they are hiding by their refusal to do things that would ever risk revealing it. I am terribly sorry. I cannot read Cyrillic. So there's
I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna jump in just for a second. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Carolyn Schaefer that's been waiting.
Oh, sure.
And then if you want to share your name so we can know how to address you later.
Can I say one more thing, Cher? I just wanted to say, Carter, that I was very moved by your talk. I was really just almost moved to tears by how your passion around what you do is just
Well, it's
beautiful.
what- we're doing it. It like again, like I in my flaming narcissism get to do spokesperson stuff, right? Because I have lawyers, but like this is everybody, right? There's a lot of us, right? Like it feels lonely, and we have the loneliest job in America, other than maybe truck drivers, right? Because you sit in your office all day, you might be with one person at a time, but you're only allowed to talk about them. So you spend half of your waking life listening to other people's problems, and then you're just by yourself with it, and then you can't talk about what happened with the people you love because it's confidential. It's so isolating, this job, and that's what we need to like recognize that, and then like compensate for that, because it's really hard. But thank you for the vote of confidence. So my associate here, whose name I can't read because I'm not literate in that particular language.
She wrote in the chat, it's Maria.
Oh, Maria, hello.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't change it
Oh, don't
for
change
some
it.
reason. So yeah, I just wanted to make a remark that I really wouldn't romanticize late Soviet music clubs.
Fair enough. I wasn't there.
For me neither. However, I am from Russia, and we've been struggling with fascism a little bit longer, as well as with depoliticized psychoanalysis. And the thing I just wanted to make this remark because we are dealing with this right now with the level of paranoia, because nobody loves paranoia, but this is what Putinist regime spreads. And the thing is that actually these Soviet music clubs, they are a great example of how KGB constructed this like playgrounds for dissidents, and how they were perfectly controlled in these environments where they were not harmful at all, and how this politics continues up to the present, and we are not able to build any sustainable communities up until now. And it's just a thing to just think about in order not to into the same pit, because the people who organized late Soviet music clubs, they were quite often Jewish dissidents who then moved to Israel and became functionaries in the Zionist structures. So honestly, the problem of trust and this thin border between being paranoid and between being realistic in terms of who you can actually trust and who actually is like collecting a dossier on you, is like a really thin border, and it can make whole infrastructures collapse. Yeah, it's just a small remark, sorry.
Thank you for that. That is, I'll tell you this too, like to your point. When I've been always a little bit offended that I was not on any of these bad professor websites. So I don't know how that happened, but so it goes. Maybe I'll be on one now. Maybe somebody here is going to put me on one. I guess one way to find out. Even since I've started posting about this stuff on Substack, I've absolutely had people trying to like trick me. Like it's been very where I'm like, I will suddenly get a follow request from somebody who only follows me and people I recommend, and then some like super liberal, like like capital L liberal sites that have nothing to do with my politics, but to a superficial outside observer, they might think that we're the same, right? Me and Letters to an American are not the same. And so they kind of masquerade as like in this discourse community, and then are like, I would love to send you my essay, linked here. I've had that like 5 times in the last 3 weeks. So just to give credence to like, yeah, that is very actively happening right now. And it's our colleagues, right? That's part of the lesson for me of the book is like the people who, like Aruna Kilanani and Don Moss, who wound up on Tucker Carlson, right? On the days that these psychoanalysts were talked about on Tucker Carlson's show, it was the most watched hour of television in America at the time, right? the specific purpose of talking about them on that show was to wreck their life, right? It's what Orwell called the 2 minutes hate in 1984, right? And they were clearly, again, there's an ultimate unknowability here where the fact pattern may never be fully established. For all we know, there was some fascist functionary Googling psychoanalyst hates white people every 5 minutes until something new came up. Like, we can't rule that out. I don't think that's a plausible inference. The plausible inference is quite obviously that they were narked on to fascists by their colleagues, right? And we've seen that happen again and again. And what I think is a heartening kind of story is that, like, when this happened to Lara, we were ready and we fought back and we prevented a lot of harm, right? That one of the things that's, you know, certainly in the American context, your academic freedom within an institution, right? Your university's grant of academic freedom only extends as far as your own profession is willing to grant that your conduct is within the bounds of the profession, right? So any university can say that if you are abandoned by your professional organization, then your academic freedom is void, right? So, like, where we set the Overton window is really important on these things, and we know that because fascists care a lot about it, right? We know that they're very eager to, like, move the Overton window to include the things that they believe. There's gonna, like, I'm wearing this t-shirt on purpose. There's gonna come a moment where Antifa, which is like a philosophy, right? There's no Antifa organization per se. I'm certainly not a member of any such thing. You know, I'm just not, but I do like this t-shirt. I think it's very flattering. Where this is gonna get classed as a terrorist organization, followed around by the FBI, like, is going to be kind of treated as like an impermissible ideology in the same basic way that, like, anybody who is in favor of basically any version of meaningful Palestinian freedom is being said to support Hamas. Like, I don't have great feelings about Hamas for various reasons. But, like, that's sort of the rhetorical device, right? Is to say, like, your ideology is, or what we're calling your ideology is, like, outside the scope of what is permitted, and so then you're cooked, right? But again, like, you're a lot more cooked if all your eggs are in the basket of neoliberal institutions, right? Like, the people who are harder to fully screw over in these situations have, like, a more diversified portfolio. Ultimately, if people want to get you bad enough, they're going to get you. But it's harder to do that the less you depend entirely on neoliberal institutions for your well-being, which is why, like, I'm not exactly saying if you're an adjunct faculty member, you should, like, learn to be a plumber, but, like, you probably should. Because doing things like that enhances your freedom in an era when, like, your primary opponent is their strategy involves institutional capture, right? Like, if I lost everything, I can still live and tell the truth. And I want to be really clear, that's a privilege that I have cultivated over time that is not equally available to everybody. I'm not saying that's a universal solution, but I am saying it is actually more available to more people than they might imagine. And that, like, we often fail to imagine it because we're in a white collar psychoanalytic cloister where only a certain life is imaginable. And the broader your horizon is, the harder you are to control. Joe, my friend.
My question will probably be underwhelming after your kind welcome, but I can't help myself because of your little invisible community shout out. Hi, friend.
Hi.
I'm probably a worse anarchist than you two. I was having a worried thing around the deinstitutionalization talk along general lines of like, is that kind of capitulating to the fascist strategy of attacking the few remaining sites of collective power that institutions might afford when there's some sense of like, actual community and organizational power built in them? But I think your unions thing spoke to it. So the question might already be answered.
No, but it is a dilemma, right? Of like, when do you know,
Yeah.
like in deep historical, you and I both love James C. Scott. And so like the lesson of James C. Scott is that like, domineering authoritarian empires, want to control and conscript people, and that, throughout history, again and again and again and again, what you've seen is people literally and figuratively run for the hills.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like pretty pro that. I don't mean to prescribe a solution for everybody all the time by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll say that, like, even kind of within the metaphorical terrain here, I don't super care what happens to Harvard. I really care that we have public education that is broadly accessible and affordable for large numbers of people.
Right.
And not for nothing, like, being another part of the reason that I'm as able to do what I am doing today is because I am a public employee in a blue state. And so like I think we have to pick pretty carefully what kinds of environs actually are like sound and safe for us. And then, be strategic about defending defensible positions, both like intellectually and strategically, in order to not just get smoked.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I guess what I wanted to ask, what might your tactical strategic kind of sense of this kind of politics and counterpower building look like in clinical work? So I'm not in a university, I'm not in an institute, I'm just now finishing up my PsyD. So like going in as a therapist, what do you think
Well,
around that
I'm gonna
field?
I'm gonna do something so annoying, which is to say that the curriculum of P-hole
Oh yeah.
is essentially a year-long answer to that.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to be teaching a course called Social Character and Its Disorders that's like, and kind of thinking about one valence of that question. But different thinkers, many of whom are the people that we've talked about today, are going to be taking a stab at that. And so I would invite you to enter the P-hole if you're so inclined, and tell your friends. And keep coming to Sheer stuff. Thank you, Sheer. We're out of time, right?
Unfortunately, yes, we are out of time for today. If you can stay for a minute with me, that would be great.
Totally.
And I just put the P-hole. Wait, did I put the P-hole or did I put something else?
Different thing. P-hole is just p-hole.com, p-hole.com.
Yeah, I did not. I'm sorry, copied the wrong
There you
thing.
go.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
So
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you were here to report on me to the fascists, all I can say is,
well, thank you so much for being with us, Carter. That was amazing. And thank you everybody for coming. We hope you can be with us again. Next month, we actually have Professor Mark Solms coming on
cool.
2nd, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's gonna be fun stuff on narcissism. So maybe it will be
opposite.
a little bit connected. Thank you for coming.
Solidarity forever. Don't get got.
We need to have you again, Carter. More things.
Hey, I'm available.
I am very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. Oh, Tara. Hi, Tara. You don't have to say hi if you're off camera. I'm just saying hello to you.